This video is about weather versus climate. First off, what is weather? Weather is the condition of the Earth's atmosphere at a certain time and place. So basically, how is the sky doing at a certain time and a certain place? And it's dependent on a lot of factors and can vary greatly day by day, as seen in the weather report you might see in the news or if you look on the internet. Like one day it's raining and it's cloudy, the next day it's just cloudy and there's sun. Then it's raining and then it's raining, and then there's some clouds, and then there's just sun. We also look at a whole bunch of stuff here: precipitation, humidity, the wind, the current temperature, things like that. In order to describe weather, we use factors such as temperature, humidity, precipitation, air pressure, wind, and visibility. We use a lot of tools to measure those. So for example, temperature is measured with a thermometer. It's a measurement of how hot or cold something is. It could be measured in degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius. Humidity, we use a psychrometer, which helps to measure the amount of water vapor in the air. We give that measurement as a percent to how humid it is compared to how humid it could be. Precipitation, we use a rain gauge, or if it's snowing, we use a ruler. We describe the precipitation by how much of the water falls back down to earth. It could come in the form of rain, snow, sleet, or hail, and we usually measure it in inches here in America. Air pressure, we use a barometer. It's how much the air is pushing on an area, or how much pressure it's applying, how much it pushes down. It's directly related to the density and the humidity. That means that the more humid the air is, the more dense it is, and the more it's going to push down because it's heavier. And we use the standard unit for air or for pressure is the bar, but it's a small number, so we measure it in millibars, like millimeters. And then wind, we use an anemometer and a weather vane. Those help us to describe how fast and in what direction the air is moving at the particular time. And that is measured in miles per hour. And usually it gives a direction to which way the wind is blowing. And then visibility, we use landmarks. So it's the visibility is the distance at which an object can be clearly seen. So we might take 3 or 4 landmarks that we know the distances of and look down towards them and see which one we start to not be able to see. If there's a lot of air pollution or fog in the area at that particular time, that can affect our visibility. There are a lot of things that can affect weather. We have the water cycle, air fronts, high and low pressure systems, jet streams, ocean currents, all of those things. The water cycle, it takes up the water, it makes the air humid when the water evaporates, and then it brings rain back down. That affects the current weather, what's happening. If our air is moving, if it's cold air moving or warm air moving, there's all sorts of air fronts that could happen there. High and low pressure systems. If it's a high pressure, the air is pushing down. It's going to be a nice sunny day. If it's a low pressure and the air is pushing up, it's going to get kind of cloudy and probably stormy. And jet streams, again, how the air is moving. And then ocean currents. Those really only affect coastal areas. So what is climate? Climate describes the weather conditions in an area over a long period of time. So instead of weather, which is like day by day what's happening, climate is what happens over maybe a year or so. What is the general condition of the area? And we use 2 things to determine a region's climate. We use temperature and precipitation. So we might look at 2 different graphs of America and see that some places are warmer than others. Or we might see that some places get a lot more rain than others. And we could describe their climates using that information. So, what could affect climate? The latitude, which is how far north or south you are, that affects how much of the solar energy you get. So, if the sun is directly beamed onto you, you're going to get a lot more solar energy because it's focused in one spot. But if you're higher north or south, the sun kind of spreads out and you get less solar energy. If you have more energy from the sun, that means there's going to be more precipitation and probably some more wind because there's warm air that wants to move around. The wind patterns in an area will affect the climate. So, wind transfers energy and water vapor around the earth. So, the whole atmosphere serves to transfer that energy and water vapor. And when that's moving, it can move from place to place, and that affects if it moves from place to place in a patterned way, like it usually moves north in the spring or something like that, that'll affect the weather in that area, which ultimately affects the climate. The amount of solar energy you get, if you have any mountains or bodies of water, that can all affect the wind patterns. Elevation will affect your climate, so that's how far above or below sea level you are. The more elevated you are, the colder it gets, so that directly affects the temperature. The topography of the land, so that's again how if you have mountains or bodies of water. So the surface features of an area is what topography is. So mountains, if a large mass of warm air is moving forward and it runs into a mountain, that warm air is going to be pushed up real quickly. And then on the other side of the mountain, since that warm air had to go up into the atmosphere higher, it cools down and then it's going to rain. So that will affect the precipitation on the other side of the mountain. Also, if your region is around a body of water, bodies of water like to stay at the same temperature most of the time, or they at least help absorb some of the extra energy or give off extra energy if they need to. And that helps to regulate the temperatures. There's not so much drastic temperature change around that area. And then ocean currents, that's the movement of water in a certain direction in the ocean. Surface currents can carry cool or warm water. And along with that, when they're moving that water on the surface, it moves the air around to different locations. This really only affects coastal areas. So if you're near an ocean, it'll probably affect you. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, like Indiana, it's probably not going to matter that much. There are three major climate zones, and those are solely based on temperature. We have the polar zone, which all year round is below 10 degrees Celsius. In other words, it's very cold. It doesn't get higher than 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. The temperate zone, which is kind of meh, it's somewhere in the middle. The coldest it gets in its coldest month is below 64, and the warm and it's got to be at least above 50 in its warmest month. And then there's the tropical zone, which is a lot closer to the equator. And it's above 64 degrees all year round. So you notice the polar zones are on the very north and south ends of the world. The temperate zones are kind of the next step closer to the equator. And the tropical zone is right in the middle. We can split those zones up into their separate subclimates based on precipitation. So, for example, the tropical climate, there's three types of tropical climates. We have rainforest, which is very wet, the desert, which isn't quite so wet, and the savanna, which is extremely dry. In the temperate zone, we have a lot more. We have the marine west coast, the steppe, the humid continental, the humid subtropical, the Mediterranean. And we could research how much precipitation that means for each of those. And in the polar area, we have the subarctic, which is kind of cold. It's mostly cold most of the time. There's some precipitation, usually in the form of snow. We have the tundra, which is much colder and it has a lot less rain. And the ice caps, which are basically just chunks of ice, and there's not a lot of weather in that area.